I never thought it would come to this. But here I am, sitting in my car, thinking about what happened on Father's Day, and I've made up my mind. My wife, Emily, has ADHD, and for the past few years, it's been a real struggle for both of us. At first, I thought I could handle it. I tried to be understanding, patient, and supportive. But recently, things have gotten worse. It's not just the little things, like forgetting appointments or misplacing important documents. It's how she's been neglecting our two kids. I'm the one who ends up getting them ready for school, making their meals, and helping with homework. It's like I'm a single dad, even though she's right there in the house with us. Every time I try to talk to her about it, she gets defensive or brushes me off. It's just my ADHD, she'll say, as if that's supposed to excuse everything. But Father's Day, that was the final straw. Father's Day was supposed to be special. I didn't expect anything extravagant, just a little acknowledgement, a card, maybe breakfast with the kids, something. But when I woke up, the house was a disaster. Toys were scattered everywhere, dirty dishes piled high in the sink, and the kids hadn't eaten breakfast. Emily was still in bed, scrolling on her phone like it was any other lazy Sunday. I took a deep breath and got the kids dressed, fed them, and cleaned up as much as I could. By the time Emily finally got out of bed, it was noon. She looked at me and said, "Oh, right, it's Father's Day, huh? What do you want to do today?" Couldn't believe it. No plan, no effort. I tried to play it off like it didn't bother me, but inside, I was furious. I told her it was fine, that I'd just spend the day with the kids. She shrugged and said she'd go run some errands. That was it. No card, no gift, no acknowledgement from the woman who was supposed to be my partner. But what happened later that day? That was the moment that changed everything. That afternoon, my parents came by with the kids' grandparents' gifts. They had been excited to see me and spend some time together. I hadn't told them about how the morning had gone, hoping we could salvage the day and make it a little better. When Emily got back from her errands, she didn't even greet my parents. She barely acknowledged the kids. Instead, she plopped down on the couch, phone in hand, completely zoning out. My mom shot me a concerned look but didn't say anything. My dad, on the other hand, tried to make conversation with Emily, asking how she'd been, how work was going, and what our plans were for the rest of the day. She gave one-word answers and barely glanced up from her phone. Then it happened. My dad jokingly said, "Emily, what did you get this great guy for Father's Day?" Everyone chuckled, but Emily, without missing a beat, looked up, smirked and said, "Nothing. He's lucky I'm even here." She laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. I felt my face turn red as the room went silent. My parents looked shocked. My kids didn't understand, and I just stood there, humiliated. Emily's complete disregard for my feelings in front of my own family hit me harder than I expected. That moment was the final straw. I realized this wasn't just about one bad day or her forgetting Father's Day. This was a pattern, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to shake off the embarrassment, but Emily's words echoed in my head. My parents stayed a bit longer, clearly sensing the tension, but there was only so much awkward small talk we could manage. Before leaving, my mom pulled me aside, whispering, "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself lately." I just nodded, not wanting to explain it all right then. After they left, Emily retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind her. I cleaned up, fed the kids, and put them to bed. It was a routine I had become far too familiar with, me handling everything while Emily zoned out in her own world. Later that night, I knocked on the bedroom door, trying to talk to her. "Emily, we need to talk," I said. There was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Finally, I just opened the door. She was lying in bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. "Emily, I'm serious. This can't keep going on like this," I said, standing in the doorway. She sighed, finally looking up at me. "What do you want, John? You're always complaining about something," she snapped. "I'm not complaining. I'm asking for a conversation. I don't know what's going on with you, but you've been checked out for months. You've been distant with me, with the kids, I need to understand what's happening. Her eyes rolled, and she got up, brushing past me. You're overreacting as usual, she muttered. I'm tired, okay? I have ADHD. You know that. Can you just back off? That was the first time she used her ADHD as an excuse. It had never been a problem before, but now it was suddenly the reason for everything. I wasn't buying it. After that night, things got worse. Emily began using her ADHD diagnosis as a shield for every disagreement, every mistake, every moment of neglect. If the kids' laundry wasn't done, it was because she was too overwhelmed. If dinner wasn't made, she claimed she couldn't focus. I wasn't expecting perfection, but I needed her to at least try. Instead, it felt like she had given up, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I tried suggesting therapy or even couples counseling. Maybe it'll help us communicate better, I told her. She scoffed, completely dismissing the idea. You're the one with the problem, John. Not me, she said coldly. I'm not going to waste money on something just because you're too sensitive. I didn't push it that night, but deep down, I knew things weren't going to get better. She refused to take any responsibility for how our relationship had deteriorated. It was as if Emily had built a wall around herself, blocking out everyone, including me and the kids. Then came the final straw. Father's Day had always been a big deal in our house. The kids loved making homemade cards, and we usually had a family barbecue. This year, I figured Emily would still be checked out, but I held on to a sliver of hope. Maybe she'd at least make an effort for the kids' sake. Maybe she'd show she cared, even just a little. The morning of Father's Day, I woke up early, expecting to see the usual excitement from the kids and maybe a small gesture from Emily. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Gone out with friends. Be back later. Don't wait up. No, happy Father's Day. No acknowledgement at all. Just a note telling me she was leaving me. Again, to handle everything on my own. That I stood there, staring at the note, my stomach sinking. It wasn't just about Father's Day. It was about everything that led up to this moment. It was the countless times Emily had put herself first, leaving me and the kids in the dust. It was the years of her refusing to listen, refusing to change, refusing to even try. The kids came downstairs, all bright-eyed and excited. They were holding their homemade cards, ready to celebrate with me. But when they saw the look on my face and asked where Mom was, I had no answer for them. I felt broken, not just for myself, but for them too. We spent the day together anyway. I smiled for them. We had a barbecue just like every year. But the energy was different. I was different. My heart wasn't in it because I knew what I had to do next. That night, when Emily finally came home, she acted like nothing was wrong. She tossed her bag on the couch, kicked off her shoes, and sat down to watch TV. Not a single word about Father's Day, not a single question about how my day went with the kids. Just nothing. I sat across from her and said, "We need to talk." She didn't even look up from her phone. "What now?" she sighed. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," I said, my voice low but firm. "This marriage, it's not working." Finally, she looked at me, more annoyed than concerned. "You're just being dramatic." "No, I'm not," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "You don't care about me, you don't care about the kids, and you refuse to take responsibility for any of it. I've tried. I've really tried, but it's not enough for you. I'm done." For the first time in years, I saw a flash of shock in her eyes. But instead of apologizing, or even trying to save our marriage, she just shrugged. "If that's what you want, fine," she said coldly. Her reaction hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected something. Anger, sadness, regret. Anything but that cold indifference. After years of feeling invisible, I realized that even in this moment, when our marriage was falling apart, she didn't care. It was like I didn't matter, and maybe I never really had. The silence between us hung heavy. I got up and left the room, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. In the kitchen, I grabbed a glass of water, trying to steady my nerves. I thought about the kids, how they would take it, how I would explain that their mom and I were splitting up. But deep down, I knew they'd seen enough to understand that things hadn't been right for a long time. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, I scrolled through my phone, trying to find a divorce lawyer. This wasn't an impulsive decision. I'd been thinking about it for months, and now I was done holding on to something that didn't exist anymore. The next morning, I sat the kids down. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had. They're still young, but not too young to know something was off. I kept it simple, explaining that their mom and I weren't going to be living together anymore. My son asked if it was his fault, and that broke me. I reassured him it wasn't and that both of us loved him and his sister very much. As soon as Emily heard what I'd told the kids, she blew up. "You told them? Without even talking to me first?" she yelled, finally showing some emotion, though it was more anger than anything else. I stood my ground. "You didn't care last night when I told you I was done. You don't care now." The kids needed to hear the truth. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I didn't know where she was going or when she'd be back, but for once I didn't care. That was the beginning of the end. A few days passed with Emily avoiding me and spending most of her time out of the house. When she was home, it was like living with a stranger. I was left with the kids, handling everything from meals to schoolwork, which wasn't new, but now there was an air of finality to it. I had my first meeting with the divorce lawyer that week. Sitting in the office, I realized how real everything was becoming. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, laid everything out clearly. We talked about custody, finances, and the house. "It's going to be messy," she warned me, "but I'll make sure you and the kids are protected." Messy didn't even begin to describe what happened next. Emily had her own lawyer and suddenly started acting like she was fighting for custody of the kids, even though she could barely manage taking care of them when we were together. She'd never been around enough to know their schedules, their favorite meals, or how to comfort them when they were upset. Yet now she was insisting she was fit to be the primary parent. It was infuriating. What shocked me the most, though, was when Emily turned my extended family against me. She called my parents, my siblings, even my cousins, and spun this tale about how I was abandoning her, how I was making everything difficult. My mom called me, confused and upset. "Why would you leave her? She's struggling," she said, buying into Emily's version of events. Couldn't believe it. Emily had never even bothered to show up for half of the family gatherings. But now, when it suited her, she was playing the victim. I tried to explain the truth, but it felt like they were more interested in saving the marriage than hearing my side. I was alone, or at least it felt that way. The kids were the only thing keeping me sane. Every time I looked at them, I knew I was doing the right thing, even if everyone else thought I was the villain. Emily started pulling her own stunts. She'd show up late to pick up the kids, sometimes not at all, but then she'd send texts accusing me of being difficult. It was like she was trying to build a case against me, and I started documenting everything. Every missed pickup, every late return, every angry message she sent. It all went into a file. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Emily dropped the biggest bombshell yet. Emily's bombshell came in the form of an email, not even a phone call or face-to-face conversation. In it, she claimed that she wanted full custody of the kids and accused me of being emotionally neglectful, saying that my focus on work made me a poor father. She even went as far as saying that I alienated her from the kids, which was absurd given how disengaged she'd been their entire lives. I sat there, staring at the screen, completely stunned. I had expected a custody battle, but I never thought she'd go this low. The worst part? She had attached statements from her friends, none of whom really knew us, claiming they had witnessed how detached I was with my kids. It felt like some twisted, orchestrated attack. I forwarded everything to Claire immediately. Her response was swift. "Don't worry, we'll handle this." But that didn't take away the pit in my stomach. The idea that Emily would try to paint me as a bad father made me furious. The kids were everything to me, and I had always been the one taking care of them. As if the custody situation wasn't bad enough, Emily started playing games with the divorce settlement. She wanted the house, half of my savings, and an outrageous amount of spousal support, even though she had barely contributed financially for years. Every demand was more ridiculous than the last. She even claimed she needed more money for her mental health, which was ironic considering she hadn't sought help once during our marriage. Even though I had suggested therapy countless times, I felt trapped. It seemed like every step forward was met with Emily finding new ways to drag me back. And then, during one of the lawyer meetings, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Emily showed up in person, which she hadn't done for any of the meetings up until now. She looked worn down, like the stress was finally catching up with her. She sat across from me, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had married years ago. But before I could even process it, she dropped another surprise on me. "I've met someone," she blurted out. The room went silent. The lawyer stopped talking. I stopped breathing. Emily didn't just meet someone. She had moved on. All this chaos, the custody fight, the divorce drama, was because she had already checked out of our marriage long before I had even filed. And she wasn't done. "He's willing to help me with the kids. That's why I want full custody." My mind reeled. This wasn't about the kids at all. This was about her building a new life with someone else. And I was the obstacle. Emily's admission left me speechless. The custody battle, the outrageous demands, the sudden urgency for the divorce. All of it made sense now. She wasn't just trying to fight me for the sake of the kids. She wanted to erase me from her life entirely so she could start fresh with this new guy. I felt a mix of anger and relief. On one hand, I was furious that she had put us all through this mess for her own selfish reasons. On the other hand, it gave me clarity. If this was about her moving on, then maybe I didn't have to fight as hard as I had been. I just needed to focus on protecting the kids and making sure they were taken care of. Before I could respond, my lawyer spoke up. "Who this woman dates isn't relevant to the custody case," Claire said firmly. "Our focus is on the children's well-being, and from what I can see, my client has been the stable parent in their lives." Emily's lawyer nodded but looked uncomfortable, clearly caught off guard by her outburst. Emily didn't seem to care. She was laser-focused on getting what she wanted. I leaned forward, finally finding my voice. "Emily, this isn't about you or whoever you're dating. This is about the kids. They need stability, and you know I'm the one who's provided that. If you want to move on, fine. But don't drag them through this." She didn't respond, just sat there, staring at her hands. For a second, I thought she might back down. But then she muttered something under her breath that sent a chill down my spine. "If I don't get full custody, I'll make sure you regret it." It was a threat, plain and simple. I couldn't believe it. This woman, the mother of my children, was willing to use them as pawns to get what she wanted. My heart broke for them. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. After the meeting ended, I walked out feeling more determined than ever. I wasn't going to let Emily manipulate the situation anymore. I had tried to be reasonable, but now it was clear that she wasn't thinking about the kids, only herself. Claire and I came up with a new plan. We were going to push for joint custody, but with the stipulation that the kids primarily live with me. It was the best option for their stability. And I had evidence, texts, emails, even photos that proved I had been the primary caregiver all along. What I wasn't expecting was for Emily to escalate things even further. A few days later, I got a knock on my door. It was a social worker. Emily had filed a complaint against me, claiming that I was emotionally abusive to the kids. Felt like a nightmare. I had to prove not only that I was a good father, but that her claims were outright lies. The visit from the social worker threw me into a whirlwind. Emily's false accusation was a slap in the face, and I couldn't help but wonder how far she'd go to tear me down. It was one thing to fight for custody, but this was an all-out war. The social worker, named Rachel, sat down at my kitchen table with a clipboard, her demeanor professional but firm. "I'm here to follow up on a report made by Emily, saying that you're emotionally abusive to your children. I'm just going to ask some questions and get a feel for the situation." I stayed calm, trying not to let the anger show. I knew this was all part of Emily's plan to get the upper hand in the custody battle. I could already hear her words echoing in my head. "If I don't get full custody, I'll make sure you regret it." Now it was clear that she was willing to destroy me any way she could. Rachel asked about my relationship with the kids, my parenting style, and whether there had been any incidents or issues in our home. I answered honestly, explaining how I had always been there for them, how I made sure they had everything they needed, and how I took care of the day-to-day responsibilities while Emily struggled with her ADHD. Then, she asked the one question I wasn't prepared for. Do you believe Emily's mental health is affecting her ability to care for the children? It was a loaded question. On one hand, I didn't want to throw Emily under the bus. On the other hand, I couldn't deny the truth. She'd been neglecting the kids for months, and it was only getting worse. I knew that if I didn't speak up now, it could cost me everything. I think Emily is struggling, I said cautiously. She's always had issues with organization, and her ADHD has made it difficult for her to keep up with things. But I also think she loves the kids and wants the best for them. Rachel jotted down some notes, but she didn't seem convinced. Have the children ever expressed concerns about their mother's behavior or about the household environment? I hesitated. The kids hadn't said much, but I knew they were feeling the strain. My oldest, Jake, had started to act out at school, and Lily had been quieter than usual. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew something was off. They've never said anything outright, I replied. But I can tell they're feeling stressed. They don't seem as happy as they used to be. Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'll need to talk to the children as well. And I'll be checking in with Emily, of course. I knew what that meant. This wasn't going to be over soon. The battle had only just begun. I had no idea how I was going to prove that Emily's accusations were lies. But I couldn't afford to back down now. I had to fight for my kids. If Emily thought she could manipulate the system to win, she was going to learn just how wrong she was. As Rachel left, she gave me a reassuring look. I'll keep you informed, Mr. Jacobs. Please make sure you're available for follow-up interviews. I nodded, but inside, I was already thinking ahead. I needed to gather more evidence, find more support. If Emily wanted to make this ugly, then I would make sure I had everything I needed to protect my kids and prove that I was the one who had always been there for them. And then, I got a call from a friend that changed everything. I think I've got something that could help you, my buddy Mike said. I heard Emily's been seeing a therapist. I think there's something she's been hiding. I didn't know where this was going, but it sounded like my chance to finally turn the tables. Mike's tip about Emily seeing a therapist caught me completely off guard. I had no idea she had been seeking help, and honestly, I didn't think she'd ever take the initiative to address her issues. But if she was seeing someone, there had to be a record of it, sessions, notes, maybe even a diagnosis. If I could get my hands on that, it could provide the ammunition I needed to expose her neglect and prove that I had been carrying the weight for both of us all along. Mike didn't have all the details, but he'd heard it through a mutual friend who worked at the clinic Emily had been going to. I can't promise anything, Mike said, but I think I can get you some information. It's not like they'll just hand it over, but I can see if there's a way to get a glimpse. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. If Emily was hiding something in those sessions, this could be the key to shifting the custody battle in my favor. But I also knew that digging around in her personal life could come back to bite me. If Emily found out, there was no telling how far she'd go to retaliate. Still, I couldn't let fear stand in the way. My kids needed stability, and they needed someone who could give them that. I wasn't going to let Emily's secrets get swept under the rug. It was time to find out what she was really hiding. A couple of days later, Mike called again. I got you something, he said. It's not much, but it's a start. I felt a rush of hope as I arranged to meet him. When I sat down with Mike at a local coffee shop, he slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were a few photocopies of a therapist's notes. Nothing concrete, but enough to give me a glimpse into Emily's sessions. One of the pages had a few sentences written in bold. Patient struggles with chronic neglect of family responsibilities. Frequent emotional outbursts, heightened stress. Difficulty balancing personal and parental duties. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a bombshell. The therapist's notes clearly acknowledged Emily's struggles with her ADHD and how it affected her ability to care for the kids. That was the smoking gun I needed to prove that her mental health challenges were contributing to her neglect, and that I wasn't the one at fault. I wasn't sure how much of this would be admissible in court, but I couldn't just sit on this information. I needed to use it strategically. The therapist's notes weren't enough to win custody on their own, but they could help paint a clearer picture of Emily's instability. Maybe I could get a statement from the therapist, or at least find a way to use this information to show that I'd been the one providing the support the kids needed all along. But I wasn't ready to share this just yet. Emily would be livid if she knew I had this, and I needed to be careful about how I used it. I had to make sure I had all my ducks in a row before pulling the trigger. The days that followed were filled with legal meetings and strategies. I started consulting with a family law attorney to see how I could incorporate the information from the therapist into my case. The more I learned, the clearer it became that I was on the right path. But as I began to move forward, Emily seemed to sense that something was off. She started getting more aggressive, calling and texting me nonstop. The messages were full of guilt trips and manipulation. She kept telling me I was ruining the family and that I needed to think of the kids. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about the kids. This was about Emily's inability to face her own shortcomings and take responsibility for her actions. And no matter how hard she tried to guilt me into feeling bad, I couldn't let her control the narrative anymore. The real challenge was coming up with a plan to get the kids out of this toxic environment. Emily's manipulation was becoming more blatant, and every day that passed felt like it was taking a toll on my children. The clock was ticking, and I had to make my move. I had the evidence now. It was time to turn the tables. Things started escalating quickly. Emily's texts and calls became more frequent, each one increasingly frantic. She started saying things like, "Why are you doing this to us? Why are you trying to destroy everything we built?" It was as if she couldn't grasp that I was trying to do what was best for the kids, not just for me. The messages weren't just emotional manipulation, though. Emily started showing up at my house, unannounced, standing outside, demanding that I talk to her. Every time she showed up, she looked like a woman on the edge, desperate for a confrontation. And I knew what she was trying to do: bait me into an argument that she could use against me in court. She wanted to paint me as the unstable one, the angry ex-husband. But I wasn't falling for it. Instead, I took a step back and focused on what I could control. I reached out to my lawyer, showing them the notes from the therapist and explaining the situation in more detail. They seemed optimistic, but also warned me that getting a statement from Emily's therapist would be tough. It wasn't likely that a therapist would testify without Emily's consent, and I didn't have much to go on besides the notes and my own testimony. I wasn't going to let that stop me, though. I started documenting everything. Every time Emily showed up uninvited, every text and call, every instance where she crossed the line with me or the kids. I even started keeping a log of her neglectful behavior. If this went to court, I needed to have a record of everything. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. One afternoon, while I was out running errands, I got a call from my lawyer. "I've got some news," he said, his tone serious. "I've been able to track down Emily's therapist. They're willing to talk to us." Couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, it felt like a breakthrough. The therapist had agreed to meet with us, but it wasn't going to be easy. I had to be strategic in how I approached this meeting. I didn't want to come off as vengeful, but I also needed to make sure that I wasn't letting Emily get away with all the harm she'd done to our family. We set up a meeting for the following week. It was nerve-wracking, but I knew this could be the turning point in the case. If I could get the therapist to testify to Emily's instability, it would give me the leverage I needed to fight for custody of the kids. The night before the meeting, I felt a wave of uncertainty. It was one thing to deal with Emily in the day-to-day, but facing her head-on in a legal battle was a whole different animal. The stakes had never been higher. If this didn't work out, I could lose everything. My kids, my peace of mind, everything I'd worked for. But I knew I couldn't back down now. I was fighting for my family's future, for my kids' safety and well-being. And I wasn't about to let Emily's lies and manipulation win. It was time to take control of the narrative. The next day, I walked into the meeting with the therapist feeling more determined than ever. This wasn't just about me and Emily anymore, it was about what was best for the kids. And if I had to go through hell and back to make sure they were safe, then that's exactly what I was going to do. The meeting with Emily's therapist didn't go how I expected. When I walked into the therapist's office, I could tell she was hesitant, trying to remain neutral. She didn't want to get involved in the middle of a custody battle, but after a few minutes of explaining the situation, she seemed to understand the seriousness of what I was facing. I was glad I had my lawyer there with me to make sure everything went smoothly. The therapist asked me questions about the kids, about Emily, and about our relationship. I kept it factual and focused on the kids' well-being. I didn't want to make it personal, but the more I talked, the more it became clear to me that Emily's behavior over the last year had not only been damaging to our relationship but to the kids, too. Tell me more about Emily's behavior with the children, the therapist asked. I could feel the tension rise, knowing that what I was about to say could have a lasting impact on the case. She forgets to feed them sometimes. They'll go to bed without dinner, or they'll ask me for help with their homework, and she won't even acknowledge it, I said, trying to hold it together. I know she's struggling, but I've tried to offer support. I've tried to be there for her, but she keeps pushing me away. The kids are the ones who suffer. The therapist nodded thoughtfully. And how does she interact with you during these times? Her mood swings are unpredictable, I admitted. One moment, she's fine. The next, she's snapping at me over nothing. It's been like this for months, and it's hard to navigate. But it's not just me. The kids see it too. They've started acting out more. I don't think they know how to cope with it. The therapist paused, then glanced at my lawyer. It's clear that this situation is taking a toll on the children, she said. What I'm hearing is that Emily's behavior, while understandable in some ways, is not conducive to a stable home environment for the kids. That's when I felt a small sense of victory. I hadn't been sure if the therapist would side with me or not, but hearing her acknowledge that Emily's behavior was negatively impacting the kids made me feel like I wasn't just spinning my wheels. We continued talking for a while longer. I tried to stay calm and focused, not letting my emotions take over. Every word felt like it carried more weight than it should. Emily had been a part of my life for so long, and now it felt like I was fighting for a future that wasn't centered around her. I was fighting for my kids, for their safety, for their happiness. I had to make sure that they were in a better environment than the one Emily was currently creating. At the end of the meeting, the therapist promised that she would write up a report and share her professional observations. I can't guarantee anything, she said. But based on what I'm hearing, I think it's safe to say the children's needs are not being met in their current living situation. Walking out of that office felt like a weight had been lifted, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Emily wasn't going to take this sitting down, and I had no doubt that she would fight back in the most destructive way possible. But I had the truth on my side, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally in control of my own fate, and the fate of my kids. That night, I sat down with the kids and tried to have a conversation about what was happening. I told them that we were going to be okay no matter what. I didn't go into the details of the divorce, but I reassured them that no matter how messy things got, I would always be there for them. That was my promise, and nothing was going to stop me from keeping it. The days following the therapy session were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and emotional exhaustion. Emily had yet to reach out to me directly, but I knew she was aware of what was happening. I could feel the tension hanging in the air as I prepared for the inevitable battle ahead. The lawyer's office had been a regular stop for me during this time, and the meetings weren't easy. Emily's legal team had started to play their games, dragging things out, trying to get me to settle for less than what was fair. But I wasn't going to back down. This was bigger than just me. It was about ensuring a safe and stable future for my kids. One afternoon, I received a call that I wasn't expecting. It was Emily. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me I had to hear her out. I braced myself for another round of accusations, maybe more gaslighting, or perhaps an emotional appeal. Hey, I know we're not in a good place right now, but can we talk? Emily's voice was quieter than I anticipated, almost apologetic. I hesitated, unsure of what she was playing at. What's this about? I've been thinking, she continued, her words coming slowly, as though she was carefully picking them. I know I've messed up, and I'm sorry for how I've treated you. But I'm asking, for the kids, could we just try to make this easier? We don't have to go to court, do we? I just want things to calm down. I was stunned. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I could believe anything she was saying. This wasn't just a we situation anymore. She had crossed a line, and I had already made up my mind about the future. Emily, it's not just about us anymore. It's about the kids. You've been neglecting them. They deserve more than that. They deserve a mother who can put their needs first. And right now, you can't offer that. There was a long silence on the other end. Then finally she spoke. I know I messed up, but please, I'm asking. Can't we fix this without tearing each other apart? My heart didn't soften. I'd heard this kind of plea before. Words were easy, but actions were what counted. I wasn't going to fall for it again. I needed to think about the long term, about what was best for my kids, not the temporary peace of avoiding a hard conversation. No, Emily, it's too late for that, I said firmly. I've already made the decision. The kids need stability, and I'm going to make sure they get it. The divorce is happening, and I'm not backing down. There was a pause, then a weak, okay, from her. Before she hung up, I didn't feel any relief after that conversation. Instead, I felt a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was closing, and though it was painful, it was also necessary. The next few weeks were a blur as the divorce proceedings moved forward. Emily's lawyer tried everything in their power to delay, but it was clear that I was prepared to do whatever it took. The therapist's report came in, supporting my claim that the kids were better off in my custody. That was a win, but I knew the real battle was still ahead. I focused all my energy on my kids. I spent more time with them than ever before, trying to make sure they knew they were loved and protected. They started to relax a bit, their anxieties easing now that they knew what was going on. The chaos of the past year seemed to be slowly dissolving. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected message. It was from Emily, but this time it wasn't a phone call. It was a text. I've been thinking. I want to be a better mother. I don't want to lose them. I'm willing to get help, go to therapy, whatever it takes. Please, can we talk about shared custody? I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Was this genuine? Had she truly come to terms with the reality of the situation? Or was this just another manipulation? I didn't know the answer yet, but I wasn't going to let this moment cloud my judgment. The focus was still on what was best for the kids. I couldn't afford to make any decisions based on emotions or fleeting promises. As I put my phone down, I took a deep breath. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I had made the right choice. I had chosen the path that would give my kids the future they deserved. A future where they were loved, supported, and above all safe. And no matter how difficult the road ahead was, I would always be there to walk it with them.